son-in-law said. I wasn't helping enough, and told me to get out. I left, but withdrawing the funds from the joint account I'd set up to help them out, and then. I never thought my kindness would get me kicked out of my own daughter's house. But that's exactly what happened 2 weeks ago. It all started when I moved in with them temporarily while my house was being renovated. I'm 52, divorced, and for the first time in years, I didn't have a place of my own to call home. My daughter, Emily, and her husband, Jack, offered to let me stay in their guest room, and I accepted. I was careful not to impose. I cooked, cleaned up after myself, and stayed out of their way. I even opened a joint account with them to cover any extra expenses my stay might have caused, depositing a decent chunk of money each month. It was my way of saying thank you. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily seemed happy to have me there, and I thought Jack was too. But then things started to change. Little comments from Jack turned into full-blown complaints. He'd complain about how crowded the house felt, or imply that I wasn't contributing enough. At first I chalked it up to stress or a misunderstanding. I wasn't going to let little things ruin my relationship with my daughter. But the breaking point came when Jack sat me down and told me I wasn't helping enough, and that I needed to pull my weight or leave. I was stunned. I just put another $5,000 into the joint account a week earlier. When I reminded him, he grinned and said, "Well, if you can afford that, maybe you could help us out with a car. We need something bigger now that you're here." At first I thought he was joking. When I realized he wasn't, my answer was clear. I told Jack no. I wasn't rude. I explained that the money I'd contributed was to cover food, utilities, and any extra household expenses during my stay. A new car? That was a luxury, not a necessity, and certainly not my responsibility. I thought he'd drop it, maybe mutter something under his breath, but instead he crossed his arms and leaned back as if he'd been waiting for this. "Well, if you're not willing to step up," he said, "then maybe it's time for you to find someplace else to stay." At first I thought I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" I asked, looking at Emily for some kind of reaction. She didn't say a word. She just looked down at her hands, as if she had rehearsed this conversation and knew how it would go. Jack didn't let up. "You've been here for months, and frankly, it's starting to feel like you're taking advantage of us. Emily and I have been talking, and we think it's only fair that if you want to stay, you contribute in some meaningful way. A new car would go a long way toward making this work for everyone." I stared at him in disbelief. A new car? The nerve of him to sit there and act like I owed them anything, let alone something so extravagant. "No," I said flatly. "I'm not buying you a car." Jack grinned, as if he'd expected that answer. "Then I think it's time for you to pack up. This isn't working." I turned to Emily, hoping she'd say something, intervene, or at least tell me this wasn't her idea. Instead, she looked away. I realized then that she wasn't going to fight for me, not against him. She was choosing Jack, no matter how unfair or unreasonable he was being. I didn't argue or make a scene. I went to the guest room and started packing my things, my hands shaking as I tried to keep my composure. But before I left the house, I opened my laptop and logged into the joint account I'd set up for them. The balance was exactly what I thought it would be, $14,300. I'd been adding money steadily for months, thinking I was helping them out, showing my gratitude for their hospitality. Hospitality. What a joke. I didn't hesitate. I transferred every single penny back to my personal account. It was my money, and I wasn't going to leave it behind after being treated like a parasite. I left the house without looking back. My car was packed, my head was spinning, and my heart felt heavier than ever. Emily didn't even come out to say goodbye. Jack stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching me like he couldn't wait to see my back. As I drove away, I replayed the conversation in my head. Jack had always been a bit selfish, even entitled, but I'd never imagined he'd go this far. And Emily? Her silence was louder than anything Jack had said. She'd always been my closest ally, my rock after the divorce, and now it felt like she'd chosen a man like him over me. I pulled into a hotel parking lot and sat in the car for a while, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't go back to my house, it was still a construction zone. My sister lived 2 states away and I didn't want to burden her with this mess. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone. Then I thought of the joint account. I hadn't even told them I'd taken the money back. I knew it wouldn't be long before Jack found out. Part of me wondered if he tried to call me, demand answers, or even have the audacity to ask for the money back. I wasn't sure how I would handle it if he did. The next morning I got my answer. My phone rang, and when I saw Emily's name on the screen, my stomach dropped. I debated ignoring it, but decided to answer it. "Mom," she began, her voice soft. "Jack says the joint account is empty. Did you take the money?" I paused, not sure how to answer. "Emily," I said carefully, "that money was mine. Every single dollar I put into that account was to help you and Jack while I was there. But now that I'm no longer welcome, why should I leave it behind?" There was silence on the other end. I could hear Jack's voice in the background, muttering something I couldn't make out. "Jack says you had no right." She started, but I cut her off. "I had every right," I said, my voice firm. "Let me remind you, Emily, I opened that account, I funded it, and I made sure it was there for both of you to use. If Jack feels entitled to that money, that's his problem, not mine." She didn't respond, but I could tell she was caught between defending her husband and understanding my side. It hurt that she had to hesitate at all. I waited for her to say something, anything, but all I got was, "I'll call you later." She hung up, and for the first time since I'd left, I didn't feel angry, I felt free. The days after that phone call were strangely quiet. No texts, no follow-ups, nothing. I wasn't sure if Emily was giving me space, or if Jack had convinced her to break things off. Either way, I didn't reach out. I figured if she wanted to talk, she would. I spent my time settling into a small rental apartment I found not far from my house. It was modest but comfortable, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't walking on eggshells or bracing myself for Jack's passive-aggressive comments. Then, a week later, I got a message from my bank. Someone had tried to access the joint account I'd closed after transferring the funds. My heart raced as I logged on to check. Sure enough, it was Jack. I didn't even have to guess. He must have thought he could sneak back into the account and take what wasn't his. That same afternoon, Emily showed up unannounced at my apartment. I was surprised to see her, but the look on her face told me this wasn't a casual visit. "Mom, we need to talk," she said as soon as I opened the door. I let her in and we sat down at the small kitchen table. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well in days. "Jack's mad?" she started. "He says you're being unfair, that you're punishing us for asking for help." "Help?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Emily, I have given you more help than most parents would. I cooked, cleaned, stayed out of your way, and paid for things I didn't even use. And what did I get in return? Jack kicking me out because I wouldn't buy him a car?" Emily winced but didn't argue. Instead, she sighed and said, "It's not about the money, Mom. It's how you handled it. You just took the money back without saying anything. Jack feels that you betrayed us." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Betrayed you?" "Emily, he told me to go. This account was meant to make life easier for both of you while I was there. As soon as I was no longer welcome, its purpose ended. What did you think I was going to do, leave thousands of dollars for him to play with?" She didn't have an answer. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, but then she said, "Jack thinks you're being spiteful." "And what do you think?" I asked. The question seemed to take her by surprise. She looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know," she admitted. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mixture of sadness and frustration. "Emily, I love you. I always will. But I'm not going to feel guilty about funding Jack's lifestyle or enabling his entitlement. If you can't see that, then maybe it's time you figured out where your priorities are." She didn't stay long after that. When she left, I wasn't sure if I had gotten through to her or if she was just retreating to avoid a confrontation. Either way, I felt a little lighter knowing that I'd said what needed to be said. A few days later, Emily called again. This time her tone was softer, almost apologetic. She said Jack wanted to put everything behind us and invited me to dinner so we could make up. I wasn't entirely convinced. Jack didn't seem like the type to let things go, but I agreed. Emily was my daughter, and if there was any chance of making things right, I owed it to her to try. When I arrived at her house, everything felt different. The air was thick, as if everyone was trying too hard to pretend that nothing had happened. Jack greeted me with an exaggerated smile and a handshake that felt about as real as a plastic plant. Emily seemed nervous, glancing between us as if waiting for someone to say the wrong thing. The dinner itself was tense. Jack kept steering the conversation toward money, asking how my renovations were going and casually dropping hints about the cost of living. "It must be hard juggling all those expenses on your own," he said, shoveling mashed potatoes onto his plate. I kept my answers short, not wanting to give him an opening. Emily tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but Jack wouldn't let up. Finally, as dessert was being served, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, we've been thinking a lot about family and how important it is to support each other. We're all adults here, so I'm just going to say it, we could really use a little help right now." There it was. The real reason I'd been invited. I remained silent, waiting for him to elaborate. "Our car broke down," he continued. "We've been struggling without reliable transportation. Emily and I were talking about it, and we thought maybe you could, pitch in. After all, family helps family, right?" Emily's face turned red and she looked away, obviously uncomfortable. I could tell she didn't want him to bring it up that way, but she didn't stop him. I put down my fork and took a deep breath. "Jack, let me get this straight. You invited me here under the guise of reconciliation just to ask me for money?" His fake smile faltered. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "We really do want to make things right, but we're in a tough spot, and we thought you'd understand." I looked at Emily, hoping she'd say something, anything to defend me, to tell him this wasn't right. But she just stared at her hands, as if she wanted to be somewhere else. I stood up, my appetite completely gone. "If you needed help, Jack, the least you could have done was be honest about it. But let me make something very clear, I am not your ATM. I'm done financing your life." Jack stuttered something about me being selfish, but I didn't stay to hear it. I grabbed my bag, looked at Emily one last time, and walked out the door. After that dinner, I didn't hear from them for a while. I threw myself into renovating the house, which was finally nearing completion. The kitchen was being remodeled, the bathrooms were being updated, and the floors were being replaced. It was exhausting but satisfying work, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I was back on solid ground. Then, out of the blue, Emily called again. She sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful, and started off with small talk about how I was doing and how the renovations were going. I appreciated her effort, even if it felt a little forced. But then she said something that set off alarm bells. "Jack and I were thinking about how much you've been working on the house, and we had an idea," she said. I braced myself. "What idea?" "Well, since your house is going to look so amazing when it's done, Jack thought it might be a good idea for you to sell it. Downsize. That way you'd have some extra money to help out, maybe even help us get a better place. We could all benefit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sell my house? The house I'd spent years in, the one I was finally fixing up to make my own again. Also, Jack could have a better place. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "Emily, do you hear yourself? Jack wants me to sell my house so I can give you money? Don't you see how ridiculous that is?" She hesitated, as if she hadn't thought it through enough to see how bad it sounded. "It's not like we're asking you to give everything away," she said, her voice defensive. "It's just that we've been struggling, and Jack thought this might be a way for all of us to get ahead." "All of us?" I said sharply. "Or just Jack?" Her silence said it all. "Emily, I love you, but this is crossing a line. I'm not selling my house. End of discussion. She tried to save the conversation, but I'd had enough. I told her I had to go and hung up, wondering once again how my daughter had ended up with someone so selfish. I tried to put the conversation behind me, but it lingered in the back of my mind for days. The audacity of Jack's proposal was astounding, and Emily's inability or unwillingness to stand up to him hurt more than I cared to admit. I kept telling myself that I was done with their drama, but part of me still hoped that Emily would come to her senses. A week later, as I was overseeing the final touches on my house painting and installing light fixtures, Emily showed up unannounced. She looked uncomfortable, shifting on the porch as if she wasn't sure if she should knock. I opened the door, trying to suppress my frustration. "What's going on, Emily?" "Jack thinks we should move in with you." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me she was joking. When she didn't, I realized she meant it. "You want to move in with me? After everything?" "It's only temporary," she said quickly. "The lease on our apartment is almost up, and we've been looking at houses, but with interest rates and down payments, we're stretched thin. Jack thought it would make sense for us to stay here for a while, just until we're back on our feet." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Jack thought it would make sense? So what? I'm supposed to finish fixing up this house that I worked so hard to make my home again, and then just hand it over to you too. "Mom, it's not like that," she said. "We would stay in the guest room, just like you did with us. And of course we'd help with the expenses." I couldn't believe her nerve, or Jack's for that matter. "Emily, I don't mean to be cruel, but let's be honest. Jack doesn't want to help out. He wants to take advantage. Again. And if you can't see that, I don't know what else to say." Her face fell. "It's not fair for you to keep blaming Jack. He's under a lot of pressure, and we're just trying to figure things out." "No, Emily," I said firmly. "What's not fair is for him to keep expecting me to bail you out while he treats me like I'm some kind of burden. I'm sorry you're struggling, but you can't keep running to me every time things get tough. It's time for you and Jack to figure this out on your own." She left without saying much more, and as I closed the door, I felt a pang of guilt. But I reminded myself that sometimes love means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. A few weeks later, Jack called me directly. His tone was unusually cheerful, almost casual, as he invited me to dinner. He said it was time to put it all behind us, and implied that Emily had missed me. I wasn't convinced this was all about reconciliation, but I agreed to go. When I got there, Emily greeted me warmly, and Jack was unusually polite, even friendly. Dinner began well enough. We talked about my house, their work, and little things like movies and hobbies. For a while it almost felt as if the tension of the past few weeks had melted away. But as the plates were cleared, Jack shifted the conversation. "So, we've been dealing with a lot lately," he began, looking at Emily. "The car finally broke down completely, and with the rent going up, it's been hard to stay afloat." I said nothing, just waiting for him to get to the point. He sighed and leaned forward. "We were wondering if you could help us out, just this once. A little loan to get us back on our feet, nothing big. You've got the house all finished now, and you're in such a good position financially. It wouldn't have to be much." I turned to Emily, hoping she'd speak up, but she remained silent, staring down at her plate as if she weren't part of the conversation. I took a deep breath. "Jack," I said, "you invited me to dinner to ask for money, didn't you? This isn't about a settlement, it's about what I can do for you." He tried to back out. No, it's not like that. We just thought since you're family." "I've helped more than enough," I said, cutting him off. "I gave you money, paid for expenses, and did everything I could to make things easier for you. And how have you repaid me? By kicking me out and treating me like I owe you. I'm tired of being taken advantage of." Emily finally spoke up, her voice soft. "Mom, we're just desperate. Jack didn't mean for it to sound like that." "Emily," I said, "I love you, but you're going to have to figure this out without me. I've given everything I can. You need to start standing on your own." I got up, grabbed my bag, and left. As I walked out the door, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done.